for one reason or another, it's always going to land in the CI signal horizon. Being a lead was just, again, it was horrible, and it was super amazing. Maria told me that I will do a good job of being a lead, based on experience. But I didn't feel completely comfortable with the position. And even during the release, every time that Claire came to me like, "Hey, is CIC not doing good?" It's like, hopefully, because if I give the wrong answer and then break something, I'm the one to blame. But yeah, it's been super fun. And I guess, like every other lead position in the release team, CI Signal is another one of those puts you in an amazing place to be able to work and contribute to other projects. You really get to know people. You get a really nice opportunity to be able to learn to be able to learn how things work. And it's ultimately it's a stepping stone to actually go beyond the release team and join a SIG and just keep on contributing. So
Awesome.
that's my story.
Yeah, CI signal is a hard job too. Like, you have to pay attention to everything going on, and if a release is stable, it depends on you telling everyone as such and following down all those issues. So that's a no joke job.
It was a nice experience.
Yeah. Hope you're ready for one more round of this. All right. Any shadows or anybody else on the release team that I've missed? Anyone want to give your experience as like a shadow? What it, application process, what it was like, that sort of thing? Don't everybody, speak at once. Well, I'll call somebody. Timmy, what was your experience being my shadow then? So Timmy was one of my minions for this release.
No, it was really good. I think, so once again, bug triage, right? And so really our goal in life was to track the things that were coming in, making sure we were getting traction, especially around code freeze, right? Like making sure that like things were either in milestone or out. And really that just involves a lot of, I think it was Kenny that said it a little bit earlier, it's a lot of like hunting people down and like, hey, is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? How are we doing, right? So the process went really well. We divvied up all the issues and open PRs amongst the team. We had a good 4 or 5 people who all, were participating in that. We all probably had about, like 15 or so things that we were responsible for making sure we checked into. I think the one thing that we should probably improve on that front is just some better automation around all this stuff. Like a good chunk of the work that we did, at least in the bug triage areas, is really somewhat automatable. Like I feel like there could be a bot that's actually doing a lot of the work that we were doing, specifically, timed around code freeze, so on and so forth. So that's how it could be better. But all in all, great experience. I will say this, for folks looking at what roles they should shadow, and maybe with just interest in something and not really knowing what to do, bug triage is great because you're going to get open issues and PRs that are from every kind of area. And it gives you the ability to kind of get an idea of what every area of the Kubernetes platform is doing. And so it also gets some time to interface with those people. So I did like that, to figure out kind of the areas that I think I want to contribute to more in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there's a lot of like interesting things. You see like the parts that you didn't realize how people were using Kubernetes at all. And you kind of get to see like, you're like, how did you find this issue? Like this one random thing. And you're like, okay, well, I guess let's triage it. Anybody else? Anybody else want to share their experience? All right.
Wait, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Ryan.
So which one of the roles would you consider to be kind of on the easier side? Which one would you consider to be complex? Timmy kind of gave it, obviously qualified bug triage as being a good one because you get to see a large breadth of things across the entire kind of project, but I'm like,
that's an interesting question.
Like, would docs be one that's, hey, you don't know much, but,
I don't know if Jim Angel's
Nothing's
on.
easy.
What?
Yeah.
Nothing's easy.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Easy was not maybe not necessarily the right way for
least difficult.
Not even difficult. It's more time consuming. Everything is difficult. Everything has a layer of expertise required.
Sure.
But there's time commitments associated with it. I would say that bug triage is the least time intensive role of all the roles, because we really only become viable in the last part of the release. So right before code freeze, during code freeze, and during code thaw, that's when bug triage kind of comes into play. During the first 2 months of the release, you're just like, got it, I'm good, everything's fine.
But if you wanted something that was like slow and steady, or a steadier commitment, bug triage and everything, like everything testing related, it always happens in a smooth, uniform distribution, right?
I guess I don't really know.
Okay. I mean, I'm thinking that maybe there are other roles that the work would come in a little more uniformly, right? So you could kind of figure out how much of your time this is going to suck up. Like documentation, I'm assuming maybe things come in, as features actually hit the branch and are actually merged, and you're like, okay, I can like fully document that or make sure that is fully documented.
Yeah. Claire?
Yeah, I think from what I've seen, the role, so we have on the release team, we have a release lead, enhancement, CI signal, bug triage, branch manager, docs, release note, and comms. I think of all those roles, the ones that are the most steady are lead, CI signal, and branch manager. But I would not say they're steady in they don't have tons of workway. I think they're just the ones doing things consistently from week 1 to week 11 or 12. I think enhancements tends to be very front loaded on the earlier side of the release, because once we hit code freeze, there's a lot less going on with enhancements. Bug triage, Nick just explained. Docs, I think, gets a little hectic around the code freeze date, as well as they're trying to figure out what docs are making it into the release and what needs PRs. Release notes, I would also say, gets the most hectic around code freeze for similar reasons. And then comms, I think, is really backloaded, where a lot of their work starts ramping up once we know the what of the release. So hopefully that gives some insight. But they all have about equal amounts of work. I'd say we are really good at distributing everything across the team.
Yep. Any other questions around the release cycle or the release team? Okay. So I would like to move on to something that I really enjoy, which is talking about what is interesting in this release. So I went through and I scraped through some of the things that I thought were kind of cool in this release, and I want to hear also what you all are interested in this release. So one of the things I saw was the CRD pruning and defaulting functionality. So what this does is when you, so right now in 1.14 or 1.13, any of the Kubernetes releases that you're probably using, if you submit a CRD with an extra field that isn't defined in the schema, it will be accepted by the API. In 1.15, at least I think it's gone to beta at this point, that isn't the case. Every field in a CRD needs to be defined by an open API schema, and I think that's very valuable, because you're not just like hiding new fields and just managing things willy-nilly. It feels like that functionality or that the methodology breaks how Kubernetes works, and I'm kind of glad that CRDs are kind of coming into a more defined structure. Defaulting is also pretty cool, where it's like, hey, you need all these fields, but some of them are more pressing than others. These ones you can fill in default. So if the user doesn't fill in the default, you can fill in the information, you have something there, so it doesn't break every time. Like if one of your CRD values is like time to live, well, you can set the default to be like 5 minutes or whatever, right? It doesn't need to be set every single time you deploy the CRD. So I thought that was pretty handy. It's not really like shiny or interesting, but I really like the tightening up on the CRD functionality, particularly since I write operators. something that's pretty cool is that third-party metrics, there's now an endpoint for third-party metrics in the kubelet. So you can get device metrics from the kubelet in a way that's like not defined in Kubernetes core. Like the third-party device vendors can define the metrics that they want to send. And now there's an endpoint for that. I'm like, dope, more metrics, make it so less code in Kubernetes core. Awesome. And then this one was kind of interesting. I saw this and it kind of scares me a little bit, but I kind of understand why it's there. So in alpha, there's something called an ExecutionHook API being added to manifest, so a pod manifest. So the idea here is that you can provide a list of commands that can be run arbitrarily in a container at any time. Looking at the KEP around this, the idea there was that if you want to snapshot a volume inside a container, you first need to quiesce the volumes that you're going to snapshot it, and then acquiesce it. And those commands need to run separate to the actual process running the container. And so this gives you the function to execute commands, and they're kind of structured in such a way that anyone could take advantage of this. I think it's neat. I'm scared because of like arbitrary code execution at any time for a container kind of scares me a little bit. But you know, I'm all for people like extending the use case of Kubernetes to fit their needs, right? And so this is a mechanism for that, and we'll see how it goes. So any thoughts on those, and any thoughts on other things that you thought were pretty cool in this release?
So let me ask about the, because a long time ago I did a good bit of XML with WSDLs and stuff like that, and so with the CRD, I mean, essentially before or currently, you're allowed to just kind of throw in extra fields. Like, yeah, you know what? The CRD requires these fields, but I'm going to throw in like 7 extra.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So there's no real way to validate. I mean, there's validate in the sense that you have everything I require, but there's no validation in the sense that and nothing more.
Yes.
Now they're actually
now they're adding
nothing more.
Yeah. So it'll automatically prune those fields. Kind of like if you could add fields if you want to.
Prune them and not call that an error.
No, it's just like, hey, that isn't defined. Yeah, that isn't defined in your CRD definition. So I don't care. Just drop them. Just totally remove them.
Any kind of messaging that tells you that they were dropped, or they
not that I saw. I didn't look in the code base to like dive into how it functions necessarily, but no, it just prints it straight up. So if you add an extra field, or you could also fat finger a field when you're typing it, and you're like, I thought that's got implemented properly, and it didn't.
Wow.
So yeah. So interesting fun fact about how CRDs work right now and how they're going to work in the future. So. Yep, any thoughts on those? All right, cool. So some changes that I think are notable to talk about as well are some stable and beta features. The Kube API server watch can now be enabled with watch cache size flags. That's the only stable feature that landed in 1.15. Pretty handy for, caching, defining the cache size, but not really anything particularly like super cool. This one's pretty neat. KubeADM now includes, this is beta, these are the beta features. KubeADM now has the ability to specify certificate encryption and decryption keys for upload. That is awesome. Encrypt all the certificates and also pass them around and make a, HA control plane easier. It's so great, I love this. So I am totally on board with this. This one was interesting to me because I didn't know it didn't exist already, but I guess it works now. Ingress objects are now persisted in etcd using the NetworkKates IO v1 beta versioning. So I didn't know that ingress objects weren't persisted in etcd before. So that was a fun fact to me.
It was persisted, but it was still in the extensions rather than in networking, so it's moving.
Oh, okay, all right. So that makes more sense.
But the more interesting bit, in my opinion, means that what this represents is the move to make ingress actually a stable API. Like it's finally getting out of the place of being an alpha or a beta API, but on the track toward a stable API, which is very interesting because ingress has been one of those has been one of those hot topics probably as long as all of us have been working on Kubernetes. But there's no good way to generalize such a wide surface, you know. So
I'm still using HA proxy. Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting. Ingress has been like kind of the forgotten like child of Kubernetes for so long. Like, yeah, you got Ingress, but like, who cares? And so now we're getting more of a tightened API around it. So that's good.
well, how do you generalize an API for something that is so specific, though? I think that's kind of what it boils down to, is that there's so many different ways that people need to use it or to configure the thing that would satisfy it or to modify, you know, particular behaviors of it, that there's not, I mean, it's hard to rationalize like a consistent, you know, generic API across that whole set, you know, like,
Yeah.
so I feel like it's been kind of, if you look at like,
we've been kicking the can for a while. It's nice to see that finally we kicked it to somewhere stable. Cool. So this one was interesting to me. Node local DNS caching has been graduating to beta. So now you can, obviously you can cache your core DNS information to a local host so that if a pod dies and it comes back, that information that may be relevant is still on the node. So that kind of speeds up DNS a little bit. I'm wondering if this may DNS lookups a bit. I wonder how this is going to affect DNS, because everyone knows it's not DNS. Your problem is never DNS. Never. It's always DNS. So that'll be interesting to see how that pans out, but I think I'm all for it for faster DNS lookups. So totally cool on that. This one was pretty cool. I almost looked past it. I almost was like, I'm not going to include it. Online volume expansions is now a beta feature, which means that you can grow a PVC as you need it while you're using it. And that's pretty killer, because like growing PVCs before was kind of a pain in the ass. At least, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a while since I've done much PVC management, but you would have to, like, if you want to extend a physical or a persistent volume in Kubernetes, you had to kill the claim, extend the volume, and then rejoin the claim. And now you can just expand it as you need it while using it. Because why wouldn't you? Like, sometimes you just need more data and you don't need to go through this hassle, right? So dope, this is dope. I love this. Of course, any change could cause any number of problems, but I don't think that's going to be too bad. So this, and now that it is beta, this is default functionality, so you can use this today if you're using 1.15 as your release. Some alpha features that are coming around that I thought were pretty cool, they got introduced this release. You can now you can turn on an alpha feature to enable non-preempting pod priority. So pod priority and preemption was already kind of confusing and weird. Let's make it even more confusing and weird. Great. So if you set pod priority, non-preempting pod priority on a class, the pod will continue to be prioritized above queued pods of lesser class, but will not preempt running pods. So this pod will essentially get scheduled first above lower class pods, but it will not kick out pods that are already running. I don't understand the use case. I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna be straight up honest. I don't get this use case, but we'll see how it works. It certainly sounds confusing to me, but all right, cool. So that's a new thing. And then this is one that I thought was kind of cool. Alpha feature to allow XFS quotas to monitor storage consumption for ephemeral storage of the pod. So before, this would only be used for empty dir consumption. This is now apparently this is a more accurate and faster mechanism for determining how much storage you're consuming on ephemeral storage than the previous mechanism. I'm saying apparently because, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a file system engineer. I have no clue if this actually works the way it's intended or anything, but I thought that sounded pretty cool. We need more metrics around basically everything. And if this makes it faster and easier to use, awesome, I'm all for it. So any thoughts on those alpha features, beta features, anything like that? Cool. Let's see, some changes you may need to be aware of. some deprecations, which are retiring in 1.16. So they're deprecated right now, and they will be out of town in 1.16. Extensions v1 beta 1, apps v1 beta 1, and apps v1 beta 2 are deprecated. So update your manifests.
This is a really big deal.
Yeah.
Because right now, if you make a deployment for even like some of the really early stuff, it'll just work. And so there's a ton of stuff like Helm charts and things like that that are just working. And a lot of that's going to change here pretty soon. So what Sagi's pointing out is super, super important. If you look at the Kubernetes blog post on this, then you can actually, it'll also show you how to set specific flags in an earlier version of Kubernetes on the API server so that you can simulate what this might look like. But it's going to bite a lot of people. A lot of people will be surprised by this. So don't let that be you.
Yeah, extensions v1 beta 1 being deprecated is pretty big because that's where deployments came from originally. And so if you're using an older chart or an older manifest, you gotta update that. Also, something kind of cool, in addition, is the v1 beta 2 config format has been added to kubeadm. So we're getting closer to a stable kubeadm config, which will be amazing because damn, that sure does change a lot. It's not confusing every time it changes. Nope. So I'm happy that we're marching towards a v1 for that. That's awesome. I haven't seen what changes in v1 beta 2. I'm sorry. If anyone is aware, any of the major changes in that schema, please let us know, but I don't. I didn't record any of the metrics changes. There was just a lot. There's a lot of metric changes. So be aware every release, the metrics that Kubernetes provides changes. We add some and we deprecate some. So I highly recommend going into the changelog and checking that out if your company does a lot with metrics gathering and that sort of thing. So check that out. Something that took me by surprise a little bit, I had no idea this was coming. If you are going to upgrade to 1.15, here are some things that you need to be aware of. Kubernetes now uses Go modules for dependency management. Instead of like dep or glide, like I might have been using in the past, we've, I guess, landed on Go modules. And so if your code or if your client Go or anything like that doesn't use Go modules for dependency management, you gotta change. Also, something that's kind of interesting, if you are using an older version of Rancher for Kubernetes, heads up, the credentials provider has been removed from core, from Kubernetes. So the Rancher authentication mechanism that existed from like 1.6 on has been removed because basically at some point, I guess Rancher forked Kubernetes and started implementing it. It was in the core at that point, and no one in Kubernetes has been using it since then, so it's been eschewed. But just a heads up, if you're using a Rancher environment that's kind of old, you may need to change. This is a big one to me. This is the AWS cloud provider cluster role will no longer be created for you automatically when you spin up a cluster. As we're moving towards the AWS cloud provider getting moved out of tree, there are certain things need to happen to facilitate that. This is one of those. If you want to use the AWS cloud provider in Kubernetes 1.15, you need to give the proper permissions to the AWS cloud provider service account in the kube system namespace. So heads up.
Although I think the cloud provider itself is supposed to be taking care of that now. It's like the role is still being created, but it's being created by the integration, not by the default, the fact that it's actually just in the default set.
Right. And so the heads up is more around like if you're using the way that you did before, like just specifying the flag in the API server, it may, like your mileage may vary now, so things may change. So some things from Azure. So I thought this was pretty neat. You can now use multiple clusters in a resource group in Azure. A resource group in Azure is essentially a VPC in AWS, and now you can have multiple clusters in a resource group. So that's pretty dope. So heads up on that. And you can also now the cloud config for the cloud for Azure can also be created from the Azure Cloud Provider Kubernetes secret. So that's some good information. Kendrick, if you're talking, I can't hear you. Okay, this is on mute. So this is something that I'm a little bit sad about, but I guess I understand why. The kubectl scale jobs feature from the CLI has been removed. You can no longer scale jobs, which I guess makes sense. I guess we're targeting deployments only as a scaling mechanism. So you can only scale deployments or replica sets. You can't scale jobs because jobs are supposed to be a one-time only thing. So I guess that makes sense, but I've used it in the past. Also, here's something kind of crazy to me. There are a number of security controls that have been removed. Allow privileged host network sources, host PID sources, and host IPC sources security controls have been removed from the API server and from kubelets. So if you want better security over what people can do in your cluster, you need to set PSPs, pod security policies. You gotta set them. Because some of these like default controls that you might have been using are gone now. So we've got definitely issues in the future. So again, this is a heads up thing. And that's about it for the major changes that I saw for 1.15. Any thoughts? Anything?
I think those security flags that you're talking about are definitely like a big deal. I'll reiterate that. That's a big deal. But also realize that what we're talking about here, deprecated means no longer available. Doesn't mean that it's not going to be there. It doesn't mean that it's being phased out. It means that if you start a kubelet in version 1.15 and you have that flag, it won't be parsed.
Yeah.
Right? So allow privileged as a kubelet won't work anymore. I just want to make sure that we're super explicit there, right?
Yeah, that's fair. You're right. You can add it all you want. It's still part of the schema for the API server, but it will not be acknowledged anymore. So yeah, you're right. They are not removed. They're deprecated. So they won't cause an error if you use them, but they just won't. API server will be like, cool, great. Thanks for the information, I guess. Kushik?
I think Duffy already answered that. So.
Okay. Anything else? Yeah, that's about it for me for the things I saw were interesting. There was a lot of stability work in this release, a lot of scalability work this release, a lot, like this was a pretty important release, I feel, for a lot of like things. Like this, it seemed like it came and went pretty quickly, but there are a lot of features, like the API machinery was a big focus this release. And so the functionality of Kubernetes is getting more and more stable. And I feel like a lot of good work was put in this release. So like kudos to everyone who put in some PRs, issues for Kubernetes for this release. Thank you so much for all your work. This is a good job. Yeah, I think this was a really good release. So if there's nothing else that anyone has, I think we can move on to demos. Duffy, Kubernetes dad, will be running a couple of demos for us.
All right.
The dad of the community.
All right. Let me share my screen here. One. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So the first one I'm going to demo is. So there are a couple of new features. Let me make my font actually visible to people. There we go. Is that better?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
First thing I was going to show was the new command in kubectl called kubectl rollout restart. This is a newer command that allows you to restart a deployment, a daemon set, or a stateful set in place. What I mean by in place, what this allows you to do, I mean, the use case for this is really things like configuration only changes, right? So if you made a change to a configuration, a config map or a secret, and you wanted to be able to go through and kind of reset all of the pods that are associated with that config map or secret, but not actually have to make some metadata change that would force the creation of a new replica set, but actually just kind of restart them in place. What this new command will allow you to do is basically that. It will patch the existing replica set and allow for the pods itself to actually be restarted. So what I want to show off is like how that actually works and like what some of the semantics are there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do kubectl get rs, before I actually start, what I've got here is I've got a deployment of card, which is just a simple little application. So if I do kubectl get pods, I can see I have 2 pods running, and if I kubectl get deployments, I have my deployment tests as 2 things. And if I do kubectl get pods, all namespaces, -o wide, I can see that these 2 pods are existing, and they are on kind worker and kind worker 2. So what I wanted to prove was that it's not going to move the deployment around to different workers. It's not going to reschedule this stuff. It's just going to restart the pods where they sit. And we're also going to dig in a little bit into how that's actually going to work, which is pretty interesting stuff. So let's do kubectl rollout restart deploy test. And what this will do is it should actually fire that restart of the pods, and we'll see what the kind of the resulting state here is. Kubectl get pods. And so we can see that it actually created a new replica set. It didn't keep the old replica set around, which is interesting. We can tell that it created a new replica set because this jumble of letters here in the middle has changed. And now we're completely on the new replica set. And if we do kubectl get rs, we can see that the new replica set is operating. It's got 2 desired, 2 current, and 2 ready. And the old one is now got 0 running the desired, which is interesting. And if we do our kubectl get pods -o wide again, we can see that we're still on kind worker and kind worker 2. We can also see that we got a new IP address. Right, the old ones were 132 and 132 just by chance, and the new ones are 133 and 133. But they're still in the same nodes, so I didn't have to go back through scheduling. We basically just restarted them kind of on the nodes that they were in. Good old get. RS. What I want to see here was so that we were on 578. So let's do kubectl get rs. With the observed generation. We see generation 4 there, which is a newer field. And if we look at the new one, which is 654, observed generation 2. So I think what's happening here is that, the actual pod template hash has changed, but the only thing that's changed in this spec is the generation number, which is interesting stuff. So it's kind of neat that it doesn't actually have the benefit of not having to reschedule means that we don't have to pull that new image down to a new set of nodes, right? That existing image is the same. All we're doing is kind of restarting the process in place. So that's a new feature. I suspect it'll be somewhat contentious, and I'm curious to see how it works out over time. I have done the restart multiple times. I don't see it rescheduling. I basically just see it restarting the pods on the existing nodes, which is a pretty interesting behavior. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, Duffy, we had a question in chat.
No.
Would you mind reiterating why old pods were not completely deleted when the new ones were rolled out?
So the old pods were actually deleted. So in other words, like if we go, let's do this. Kubectl get pods. So -o wide. So I'm gonna jump into kind worker here. Docker exec. This is kind of like the same as SSHing into the node where the pod is running. And if I do crketl pods, I can see that this pod is the one that's running here on this node, right? So this is pod ID, this is the name of the pod, all that stuff. And if I do crketl PS. I can see my container and the image that's related with, and it's been running for 3 minutes. So now I'm going to go ahead and do that kubectl rollout restart again. Test. There we go. And then we'll run that same command again. And we'll see that the pod ID has changed, right? You can see that here. The actual pod ID has changed, and the container image itself has changed, right? So we can see the container ID, DA68 was the old one, 24AE is the new one. The image has not changed, so the pod ID hasn't changed. Actually, the pod ID has also changed. So the old pod ID was 3355 or 355, and the new pod ID is 650. So really, this container and its associated pod have been removed from this kubelet, and a new one has been created. Right? It's not like it's completely. It's not like you went in and upped the process. You have actually deleted the container and put a new container in its place. But the neat thing is, you haven't done that in a way that would require it to be rescheduled onto a new node. So all of the work that you've done to actually, any volumes or anything else like that that were associated with that pod would still be present.
Yeah, that's neat. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that.
That's a new one. So the other one.
One more thing. Another question was, are the values to specify in generation field arbitrary, or should you confirm them with consistent increments?
I think it's supposed to be consistent increments, but we can look at the code to find that out.
We don't need to do that live necessarily, though.
So just go back, so that feature is mainly, it seems like it's useful in a case where you'd like to restart a pod, but you don't want, like I think Duffy said, like you don't want it to go through the scheduling. You don't want it to get kicked off and you want to restart it. Right now you might say, oh, I'm going to delete those pods or whatever, and they might get rescheduled to a new node, right? So this kind of guarantees like, hey, I just want to restart it, but I like it where it is because it's got things attached to it and it's found a good home. I like it where it is, but I just want to restart it.
Yeah. So I could see it being useful for things like testing, particularly
Well, there's a ton of.
What's that?
So there's a ton of behaviors here that, this is not a new idea. People have been using this idea for managing software for a long time, and it really comes down to one of those semantics that we kind of sort of take for granted with software, right? So generally speaking, when we load up a piece of software or start executing a piece of software, we take a lot of the configuration, maybe the certificates that are on disk, all of those things, and we kind of load them into memory, and those things are in use. Without doing something like a file system watch, we're not going to be able to actually determine that anything on the underlying file system has changed, right? So for example, if you start up a web server and that web server isn't doing a file system watch to see that certificates have changed, it's not going to be able to change the certificate that is in use dynamically without actually having some semantic written into the code that allows you to watch that certificate on disk and behave differently when it changes, right? What this allows us to do is say, look, we want the ability to restart a particular process when we know the file system has changed. Like those underlying primitives have changed. We want some way to kick the process to allow for it to pick up the new set of changes, right? This might be a new config map. It might be a new secret. It might be a new TLS certificate. It could be any number of different things. But it's a configuration-only change.
It's like a reset button.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. Like I said, I think it'll be useful in testing. Hopefully, when you're done testing, your code can go anywhere, right? You can restart and it can be picked up anywhere and it's fine.
Yeah. So the other one I wanted to show off was a kind of a newer feature in kubeADM, which I think really makes it easy to understand a particular behavior that has come up many, many times in the kubeADM chat, and also just within people who've been running TLS secured Kubernetes clusters, which you should be doing by default everywhere all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be weird not to do that anymore.
Is this relatively new thing within kubeadm that allows you to see the expiration of the certs associated with the node you're on. I'm going to say that again. This command, all kubeadm commands generally will only apply to things that are running on the node where you run kubeadm, generally speaking, right? So like kubeadm init will actually init the Kubernetes daemon processes and all that stuff on the node you're on. And so in this case, kubeadm alpha search check expiration will look at all of the certificates on this control plane node that I am actually logged into and give me an idea of when they expire.
This is huge.
Yeah. Now, I actually did a TGIK on this, I guess it was a week before last. It was called What Happens When All Your Certs Expire? And I showed this command off there, but I was showing it off kind of like before it had been released. But it's in 1.15 now, so now you can actually play with it. It's pretty neat. The other neat thing about this is that the way kubeadm works, you could actually just use this newer version of kubeadm to evaluate this even on old clusters. Like if you used kubeadm to start up a 1.12 cluster or a 1.13 cluster, if what you're trying to understand is whether the certificates themselves have expired and you don't want to go through each individual piece and figure that out, this is a really good command to do this. The last thing I'll point out, which I think is actually probably for me the most interesting bit, is that you can see that the certificates that they're referring to are not just the certificates, the TLS certs that are in Kubernetes AKI, but also those that are in Etsy Kubernetes, but also these certificates, right? The Kubelet conf, the scheduler conf, the controller manager, and admin conf are all in this list. And what's neat about that is it means that you're able to actually see the expiry of those certificates without having to actually like take Kubernetes and like, decrypt or base 64, unload this, and then, I'll kind of go through the whole process to figure out what the expiry of this certificate is, right? Which is pretty cool. There's also a lot of really cool new features inside of kubeadm that allow you to rotate those certificates now. So if you do kubeadm, see, it's in it. Right. So now you have a new alpha command called renew, which will allow you to renew all of the certificates that you see in that list as well, which is pretty neat. So with renew, you can renew particular components just by giving them a particular name, or you can do all. And this will actually leverage the existing CA that it knows about and just print new and issue new certificates associated with all of the things in the places where you expect to find them. So that's what I wanted to, those are the two things I wanted to demo.
Awesome stuff, man. Like the renew is killer. That is so awesome. And I watched your TGIK. It was great. Of course it was. And yeah, if you want a more deep dive into this, please watch that TGIK. Because this is awesome. Like this is a big problem in the Kubernetes world. Like if TLS stops working, your Kubernetes cluster is essentially going to stop working. Now your pods will continue to run, blah, 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 yada, yada, but everything else falls apart. And it falls apart in such a way that you wouldn't even realize it was happening until you kind of dug into it a little bit. So it's kind of a secret failure. And so it's cool that we have these tools now that will help facilitate this problem. Or not facilitate, fix it for you. Thank you so much for those demos, Duffy. That was awesome.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Anything else anyone wants to talk about? Otherwise, I'm pretty much I'm out of gas, I guess. Was there anything of interest that you guys saw? Anything in the Kubernetes, upcoming in Kubernetes that anyone's like looking forward to or they're working on that they kind of want to talk about, like please tell us.
Cheapest shout out to anybody who wants to help with maybe any of the customer stuff.
Duffy, mute yourself for a second. Okay. Go ahead, Timmy.
I don't know what happened. So very well might have been me. I have no idea. Yeah, but just a sheepish shout out to anybody who may want to help with some of the cluster API stuff out there. I know we're looking for folks to assist on the Azure side, on the Azure provider side. Always assistance needed there. So if you're familiar with Azure, want to help build out Kubernetes on Azure, come join the party.
Yep. There's a number of us who are participating in Cluster API adjacent functionality, like different providers and things like that. If you don't know what Cluster API is essentially a mechanism for you to create a Kubernetes cluster using a Kubernetes cluster. The workflow, a really quick workflow is like you create a cluster using Cluster API, point it, like depending on whichever cloud provider you want to use. There's different Cluster API mechanisms for that. You go Cluster API create cluster, it stands up a kind cluster, sets up all the API for you, sets up the cloud provider information, and then goes and starts all of the machines that you would need to create the cluster that you configured, creates a cluster there, and then pivots your the kind pods to that new cluster. So you just do this quick, weird, like boop, boop, hop, hop to a new cluster. So it is a way that the SIG cluster lifecycle team has been putting together to programmatically create Kubernetes clusters, and I think it's pretty cool. Or declaratively create Kubernetes clusters, and I think it's pretty cool. I'm repeating myself. So yeah, but we do need a lot of help. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of cloud providers. Boy, there's a lot of cloud providers.
And can I just jump in and say one thing right there? Like, you do not have to be, you don't even have to be a programmer to help. Yeah. Like, seriously, like half of what we need on the Azure side still are folks to actually just run the process. Like, does this work? Are there bugs in the code? Like, what doesn't work for you? What's your user experience like? That kind of contribution is really valuable too. So please, any help.
Yep, and the same goes for just the Kubernetes community at large, or the communities, any of the repositories at large. You don't need to be a programmer to contribute to Kubernetes. You just need to have a willingness to help out in some capacity in any way that you want. You don't need to be a programmer. You don't need to be technical at all. Just help. We need help, please. There's just so much work to do. Please, God, help us. Anything else? Anything y'all are working on? Hey, Tamiko, how's it going?
You're still unmute. Hi.
Okay, so someone in chat mentioned that they're interested in joining multi-tenancy initiative. With limited time commitment. Yeah, the limited time commitment, I dig it. Multi-tenancy is an interesting use case, and it's something that I think we do a lot of, but like better controls around that. I don't know if there's a proper SIG for that though. Does anyone know what SIG that might be? I'm trying to think, what would that be? It's not cluster lifecycle. All right, well, I don't know.
It's a working group.
Is it? Okay, cool. So if you're interested in joining any working group or any SIG, there are meetings. If you do have limited time, just attending the meetings is enough just to get familiar with what's going on. And if you see something interesting that you feel like you have the time to work on, that's a good way to jump in. So just attending meetings, just doing stuff like this is contributing in some capacity.
Working WG multi-tenancy.
Okay, cool. Anything else anyone's interested in?
Tasha, Drew would be your VMware point of contact.
That's I'm. Yeah, so you're someone else.
Listed as one of the organizers.
Cool. I don't really have anything else. Thank you so much for everyone who joined. I think there was some pretty cool stuff that we talked about. Some also just really technical stuff. That's kind of boring, but you know, things you might need to know for your future Kubernetes life. Yeah, thanks for attending. This is a lot of fun to do, and thank you so much, Duffy, for your cool demos. It's always fun to see just anything that's working in the Kubernetes community and what's going new. I dig it. Something working, hooray! No. Anyway, so yeah, this has been the Cloud Native Social Hour. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Bye.